Hi, everybody. My name is Jason Tugman, and today I will be presenting Digital Health U.S. Market Pathways, Navigating an Evolving Regulatory Framework. We will be focusing a lot on cybersecurity and and how to navigate that through the regulatory process. The reason that we're going to focus on cybersecurity is really because of the germination of this talk, why I wanted to give this presentation in the first place. I was speaking with a client, and we all know that the cybersecurity requirements for medical devices are increasing in pace, whether it be regulation or guidance documents coming out of the FDA, whether it's MDR out of the EU or Japan, which has its own piece parts. The individual that I was talking to was, I guess, frustrated because they were early stage product developer, and they were trying to navigate their way, through the regulatory, the approval process at the FDA, but then understanding all the cybersecurity components. There can be up to 500 controls to at least consider for a device. Do you need to put all those controls in place? Of course not. Of course you don't. But as my client is not a cybersecurity person, and so he had questions about like, how do I do this? How do I navigate this? And my venture capitalists, my board of directors are asking about our cybersecurity for our organization. What do we do? And so I think that people overthink it, cybersecurity through the regulatory process, and then they assume that what you do for your device and what you do for your organization are distinct, are different, and they're not. There's so much optimization to have. And so I really wanted to dig into that today, because if that client has that problem, I know that other people have that problem. So who am I and why am I talking about this? First of all, I'm not doing this alone. I guess silently I am because of the format, but my colleague, Nikki Batista, she and I actually give a form of this talk together in the longer format. She joined MCRA directly out of the FDA, where she she was one of the reviewers for all the 510K submissions that came to the FDA. She did all of the, pre-submission, so the conversations you have with the FDA, and then she reviewed all the documents, so she knows what to look for digital health and cybersecurity for the approval process. Myself, I do not come out of the FDA. I'm probably one of the only few people that work at MCRA that did not come directly out of the FDA. I have been a consultant here in Washington, D.C. for about 15 years. All of that time has been spent in cybersecurity. I initially was working at a company called MITRE, which some of you might be familiar with, where I was developing technology prototypes for the intelligence community in the Department of Defense. And kind of in the private sector, I do a lot of work with venture capitalists, both with the the funder and the fundee from a cyber diligence perspective. I've raised rounds of funding myself, so I'm very familiar with that process, of that diligence process. I work with multinational organizations on their organizational cybersecurity, and more specifically, I write a lot of standards, and I'm involved with, I guess, the maturation of a lot of standards, both in the U.S. and Canada and further abroad from cybersecurity, so writing standards. And then, of course, digital health and medical devices is really my primary focus. And so, what I want to talk about today is helping my client and have you guys basically listen in. So this is what I would tell my client. This is what they need to know, what you need to know, so that you can optimize your cybersecurity spend. And that is at the device level and at the organizational level. I'm not going to get technical. This is a high-level conversation meant for those people who report to the board of directors, who have to report to your investors, and who are in charge of budgets and roadmaps, and need to make sure that they are doing what they need to do, not only for their organization, but for their devices as we navigate the approval process. So I want to first of all define what technology is regulated by the FDA. And then from there is your technology of concern to the FDA is your device of concern to the FDA, because there are some nuances there. I want to understand the current regulatory landscape for cybersecurity. And I want to help you overcome the major pain points of the regulatory submission process. Again, my client is overwhelmed. You have to be overwhelmed. Our job here at MCRA is we're a full service CRO. So we'll go all the way from your clinical studies to your post-market of your device. My job and Nikki's job is to help with mainly digital health. My job is more specifically to cybersecurity and helping organizations through their 510K, drafting their 510Ks, partnering with them in their submissions, and knowing from Nikki's experience and all of MCRA's experience, knowing what the FDA is specifically looking for. So being able to overcome those challenges. And then optimization, right? I'm sure that most of you guys in the audience are not the fingers on keyboard admins that are going to be doing the controls. But you need to know from a spend perspective, what are we looking at? What are we in for here, right? Because you need to be able to talk to, again, your board and your investors. And then finally, on Monday, we had a new document from the FDA called pre-certification, Precert. I'm going to talk about what you need to know, because that is the marrying of organizational cybersecurity and your device cybersecurity and the maturity of that, which can speed the process of approval for your medical devices through the approval process. So it's awesome. So, you know, we all kind of know the future of digital health. I'm not going to go into this a lot, but we all know that, and I know that you know because you're in this market, that cybersecurity is a major concern for medical devices. 41% of cyber attacks, all classification of cyber attacks, 41% of those in 2018 was from the healthcare sector, right? So we know, your investors know, your board knows, your the people that will be purchasing your medical device and using your medical device, they all know that. So they want to know what you're going to be doing in cybersecurity. So if we look at just out of the FDA, because of what we've seen, I'm going to do this probably quite a lot. I'm going to do the video juggle. Because of what we know about cybersecurity and what we know about digital health and how it is increasing in its pace, in its innovation, the FDA is coming out with a lot more guidance documents. And so we can kind of just see that, including SAMD, software as medical devices, general wellness guidance, cybersecurity guidance, pre-certification guidance. The pilot program is now in there in 2019, now 2020. And then what we're looking at ahead, there's so many guidance documents that are in draft, again, both in the US and in the EU. Again, going back to MDR. So there's more guidance documents and regulations coming down the pipe. So now is the time to pay attention, and now is the time to make sure that what you're doing is robust and buttoned up so that you can have that efficient process. What you don't want to do is get through the approval process and you get your product out in the wild, and then realize that you want to do an update to your device, right? And that can be what's called a controlled update or an uncontrolled update. Talk about that a little bit more. But really, a controlled update is just minor patches and little, bits and bots to patch a device, or it's not adding any complexity. But an uncontrolled update can be a full software update. It can be new features to your device. It can be patching a significant cyber risk, because as we know, cyber risks evolve. And so we don't want to get to that post-market environment. And if we have an uncontrolled update that we need to do, we have to go back through the 510K process maybe a year or two from now. And we use what our knowledge of last year's guidance was, and so that we didn't maybe do a lot. And now we've got to almost re-engineer our device or put in a lot more time and effort just to secure the device to meet the standards, the new standards that we didn't have to meet back when our device was out initially put through. So doing things now, understanding what your device is, understanding what your level of risk is now as you are in that early phase or even in your post-market. Doing that analysis now is the best way to optimize, because you don't want to underdevelop, but you also don't want to overdevelop. And we'll talk about kind of, there's a world of cybersecurity controls, mechanisms and tools and bits and bots and features that you can, or maybe, or should, or I don't know, or what the heck is that? Do I need it? And you don't want that to be a guess 6 months, 3 months, 1 month out of your submission, or 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 2 years into post-market. You want to know that now. So you want to determine your level of risk. What is your device doing? And then you want to document that risk early. If you're going through, FDA offers what's called a pre-sub. So if you document what you think your risk is for your device, what you think what your controls are for the device, what the functionality of the device is, and you go into your pre-submission, which is a one and only meeting that you get with the FDA, where they can kind of give you their feedback on what you think, as opposed to going in and saying, here's what we do, what do you think? Going in with your own opinion, and they can then give you more more directed guidance, I guess, as opposed to, you know, just getting information about what their opinion is, which is valuable, of course. On the level of risk, you can get a lot deeper. So determine your level of risk, document your level of risk, and develop secure coding up to that level of risk, if it's a SAMD, if it's a software as medical device. And then knowing your risk first and not last. By the way, your investors and your board is gonna appreciate that. Again, that above the fold, right? 41%. You don't want to be that above the fold. In other words, the above the fold of the newspaper when you're having a bad day. You want to be able to communicate what the level of risk is to your investors and to your board, what you're doing about that risk, what controls you're putting in place, and how you are going to look at that device roll forward. So from a regulatory spectrum, medical devices really fall across that spectrum from low risk to high risk, and there's a gray area in there. There's a lot of topic to cover here. We unfortunately don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to go through this, but know that myself and Nikki are available both in the Q&A session here in the live recording on the platform, and then obviously just reach out to us anytime. We can go into deeper, but just know that the focus of the FDA increases, obviously, as your level of risk increases, and then there's a gray area. And then it really all becomes down to, you know, is my technology regulated by the FDA? And you determine that, again, you're going to hear this word a lot, by risk. You know, what is the level of risk associated with my technology? What's its intent? What is my technology's intended use? Technology really plays a part when it's AI and machine learning and just any technology, right? And then, you know, what's its intended use? And then finally, is my technology a medical device? Is it intended to diagnose, cure, mitigate, treat, or prevent a disease or condition? Your device. So in other words, is my swoop device a medical device? I think not. Comfortable, right? But if we look at that on a scale, and we think about thermometers, right? General purpose thermometer all the way down to a regulated thermometer, we can see how that kind of almost gray area begins like medical grade thermometer, but, you know, isn't used for diagnosing, right? So where is that intended use? What is its capability? Yes, but what is its intended use? What is its market? Because based on how we talk about our devices to the FDA is the level of concern that they will have for our device. And so we're going to fall into this spectrum here. You'll have these slides, forgive me for not covering them in detail, but you can see what is that, you know, begin to kind of look at that gray area right there, that medical device data systems, you know, that sweet spot right there, where again, my little swoop device is very comfortably a general wellness fitness device. And we're going to think about risk from high risk to low risk. From a cybersecurity perspective, it does marry against the market of how FDA, who they would use a minor level of concern to a major level of concern. From a cybersecurity perspective, the FDA looks at a tier 2 device and a tier 1 device. Tier 1 device being that elevated level of risk. So when we talk about cybersecurity in medical devices, we have to think about the device's trustworthiness. This is a quote that was actually said at the 2019 workshop that launched the new pre-market guidance. This is a great quote that I scribbled down. I think it was said, well, I won't say who it was said by, but on the panel that I was on, it was said, and I was scribbling it down because it is, if you look at that timeline that we showed earlier, this really almost foretold that timeline, in that there's a steady drumbeat of guidance and policies coming out of the FDA. And that's just the nature of cybersecurity as it continues to evolve, right? And we saw that in that timeline. What we know about cybersecurity, what we need to put in our cybersecurity, in our devices, will evolve over time and get more stringent. Right now we have guidance documents, but we might have regulation. I hope we don't. We can get into why that, it may be later. We're just in the sidebar conversations. But we're really going to look at trustworthiness of a device. In other words, how does the organization ensure the connectedness of the device? How does it maintain its level of security, its level of trust, its ability to do its function reliably out in the market? So the trustworthiness of the device begins to matter quite a lot. And again, the pre-market guidance, the 2018 draft, which is currently in draft, really is a sea change of the way that we think about cybersecurity and medical devices. And it really has 4 quadrants of concern. The first is it's aligning with the NIST cybersecurity framework, the NIST CSF, which is really the guiding framework for all policies and all standards and all models coming out. I've worked on the Department of Energy's update to the cybersecurity capability and maturity model. In working on that, our main focus of that was to align that model to the NIST cybersecurity framework. So a lot of all US standards, regulation, guidance documents are really aligning to the NIST CSF. And then it introduces the tier 1 and tier 2 aspects, which we'll talk about it here in a second. Labeling concerns for cybersecurity, and then the CBOM and SBOM. Don't have time to go into that, but it's brilliant. I'm super stoked that it's in there. But it is a cybersecurity bill of materials and the software bill of materials. In other words, what are the bits and bots in your device? That way you can use the CBOM and SBOM to communicate to the SDOs, or to the HDOs rather, the healthcare delivery organizations, the hospitals, networks. What is in those devices, so that you can have that cybersecurity control handshake. We're responsible for these controls. You are responsible for these controls, right? That is the intent of the cybersecurity bill of materials. I think it's brilliant. And then just labeling requirements as well. So when we talk about risk, we have to talk about tiers of risk. And we touched on that. Tier 1 is that high cybersecurity risk. Tier 2 is anything that doesn't fall into a tier 1 risk. Notice the name that the FDA gave tier 2 risk. They didn't call it no risk or low risk. They called it standard cybersecurity risk, and that matters. In other words, what they're saying is if your device is a medical device, and if it is a device that can connect either wired or wirelessly to a device, be it a medical device or a non-medical device or a network, or just out into the internet, and that a cybersecurity incident affecting the device could directly impact patient or cause patient harm to multiple patients. Keyword, multiple patients for tier 1. Tier 2 is a medical device in which the criteria for tier 1 devices are not met. The way that the FDA looks at that is all of the controls that are all of the guidance recommendations that are in the pre-market guidance draft 2018 need to be considered and mostly implemented in a tier 1 device. In a tier 2 device, they all have to be considered, but you have a lot more leeway in giving a risk-based rationale for why it shouldn't be in there. Why is that important? If we look at just the pre-market guidance, it links out to other standards and other standards and even other regulations, and that can compound into about 500 controls that need to be considered. That's huge. And from an organizational optimization perspective, you're like, oh my gosh, how do I even begin to understand these 500 controls, much less do I need them? And it begins with risk. And then conversations with people like me or people like your cybersecurity folks on staff. A lot of smaller developers, product developers don't have full-time cybersecurity. That's totally reasonable, but at some point you need to get that feedback, get that guidance. You just do. So, but just in the pre-market world, we're looking at about 15 different guidance documents from the FDA, standards that the FDA branches out to, regulations, et cetera. Post-market, there's 8, but they get a lot larger. So, you know, from a processes perspective, there are cybersecurity, there's risk management processes that need to be stood up, repeatable risk management processes, patching processes, just a ton of processes and controls to consider in your device. And so it can get overwhelming very quickly, especially as I'd mentioned, when you think about the needs of not only the product group, but the organization, because you can begin to see how you might be double dipping, because your organization, well, you need, you know, maybe encryption, maybe you need a VPN line, maybe you need hardware, your hard drives encrypted. So, you know, you need risk management procedures, you need all kinds of things for your organization. And then you need to do that all over again for your organization, and you don't. One thing that I always like to point out is that guidance documents do not equal standards, right? So if we look at a standard, we got AMI TIR 57 here, right? It's a standard. I don't know how many controls are in this, but there's a fair few. You know, we got TIR 24971 right here. We got ISO 14971 here. So all of these documents in some part need to be considered. Is it relevant to your device? Should it be relevant to your device, right? But everything that is in these standard documents might be linked from the guidance, but doesn't mean it's germane to your device. In other words, a standard does not equal guidance. And a guidance is recommendations for controls to consider from the standards, right? You don't want that to be explicit. And this is getting to that regulation piece. Guidance documents uses the word may include, may consider, recommend. You're like, oh, it's soft language. I don't need to do it. Regulation uses the word shall, should, and shall, right? And may is in there only because it's guidance. Think of the may as the carrot to the shall of the stick, right? That is why we want guidance documents. They're flexible. They can come out faster. They can be reactive to the market, and they're not prescriptive. They allow us the risk-based rationale for what goes in there, right? And I talked about this a little bit already. If you have a controlled, you have your device going through the pre-market, and so all of the procedures and standards and uses for every stage of your medical device, but then once it's out in the wild, if you want to modify that device, you have controlled cybersecurity risk or uncontrolled cybersecurity risk out in the post-market. And if it is uncontrolled, in other words, if it is a significant update to your device, it most likely will need to go back through the 510K process. Again, organizations like MCRA can help you. Obviously, you can reach out to the FDA as well for questions. But these are important things to know as you're doing your product development life cycle. Again, going back to optimization, it's great to have a product in the wild. It's great to have a roadmap, right? But if that roadmap doesn't take into consideration, does your device, does this update, does this patch, does this reaction mitigation from a cyber risk impact our device in such a way that it is a significant update that it might have to go back through the FDA process? If you're not considering that, as you're developing your product roadmap, you are guaranteed to have to redo a lot of work or reconsider a device after a significant spend has been put in. So know your risk rationale, pre-market, and maintain your risk rationale post-market as you're developing your timeline. So you can piece part this out. What you have to do in the design phase from a control perspective, maybe if you know you have a USB in your device, maybe not have the port on the outside, have the port inside, because it's only used for maintenance, for for the service person to come in and maintenance the device. Well, why have that exposed? If it's exposed, you now have to have all kinds of logical controls around that USB port. But if it's inside your device and it has to be, the device has to, the device, if it's, you know, a cart or something, the device has to be opened up to then plug in to the PCB, your USB port. It's not even on there, you have to plug it in. Then you can look at physical controls. And you know that I would rather close and lock a door than have a security guard and a camera and all kinds of things, which is basically what a logical control is. You're trying to do everything digitally with alarms that you could really just do with a padlock, which is, so physical controls, considering those, so your design phase controls should be considered very early. Pre-market documentation, again, don't get 3 months out from your documentation to begin to think about cybersecurity controls. From an optimization perspective, you've probably wasted a lot of time, money, and energy already. Because again, you could have been doing things, physical controls, you could have been doing with logical controls, or, you know, vice versa. So, and then think about your post-market risk management and your post-market controlled and uncontrolled updates. If you're not considering the post-market implications, ramifications of your device, because you're only focused on getting your device through the approval process, you are causing overhead. Think of it as entropy. You're inducing what I call cyber risk entropy. Your system is getting more complex. You're adding complexity, and you're not considering the cybersecurity concerns of that complexity. And now you're 3 years out on your device, and you are in an entropic state where you can't change and implement new features because your controls are baked in and you don't have the flexibility or foresight to have implemented them either earlier or know that they would need to be implemented later. And that is a great way to get to the end and then have to go to the board of directors and be like, yeah, we need to kind of start over. And you know, and I know that that happens a little bit too much. I really am running out of time. The Precert is very exciting, but what it basically does is it takes a focus from the product, the FDA's focus from the product, to the company and the product, from a periodic review, so the 510K process, periodic review, to a continuous review, from a manual process to implementing some enhanced regulatory decision support, so basically some logical bits and bots. So the Precert is really a way to get your device, get your SAMD, your software as a medical device, through the submission process a lot faster. If you do have those uncontrolled updates, those significant updates, if you've gone through the Precert process, it will speed that process up greatly. And but again, just know that they're starting to look at the corporation and the product. And a way to look at this, and again, this is a screenshot from the FDA, is you have to look at these 4 pillars and notice that cybersecurity responsibility is in there when you're looking at the device and when you're looking at the organization. And so marrying the organization cybersecurity framework, guidance, strategy, document, and having that trickle down and support the product group, right? It can be funnel this way or funnel up. Taking if you're a small organization, start with the device and then go up into the organization. So at least you're making sure that everything that you need to do for your device is covered within your organizational strategy. Having those married together is key and critical to the success of your device and the submission process. There's a lot of takeaways here. I am going to bail for time, but you can look at this. And what I want to just show or tell everybody is that the approval process doesn't have to be complicated, but it does have to be premeditated. It has to be. You have to think about the device, not only to get through the submission process, but all the way through into your post-market. So myself, Nikki, we'd be glad to interact with you on the platform here. Our emails are on there. Again, Nikki's really the big brain on the FDA side, and I try to be at least a medium-sized brain on the cybersecurity risk management from the organizational side and the device side. Thank you all very much for listening, and I really look forward to interacting with everybody throughout this conference. Thank you very much.